Hello, is that Nicholas there?
It is Nicholas there.
It's a surprise to see you in front of bookcases.
Yes, well, there we are. All genuine books as well, some of which I've read.
Those aren't just those hollow books that you put up to make
No,
yourself.
no, they are genuine books.
Yeah, I have no books. I have, uh, um, I had the politically incorrect guide to American history,
Oh, excellent.
and I really don't understand it. It's too difficult for me.
I'm sure not.
I need to get a historian or some proper professional. Maybe someone from the Trump administration.
Well, don't hold your breath.
Maybe the defense secretary. He seems a handsome fellow. Seems a loquacious chap. Don't you think? Anyway,
Yeah.
it's Will Richardson here and Nicholas Richardson there. Nicholas is in Warsaw, and I'm in an undisclosed location again. I can't tell you where I am, or I have to kill myself. It's terrible. It's kind of, that's not the way you usually say it, right? You usually
Exactly.
say, I have to kill you if I tell you. But in this case, I have to kill myself if I tell you where I am. And today is a good day to die, as the Indians say, in Little Big Man. But I want to go to the park this afternoon and stretch my legs.
Okay.
There's a leg stretcher there that I meet, and they stretch my legs.
Good.
Did you know that? Have you ever done that?
No,
No. But you used to like to stretch your legs on your bike, didn't you?
exactly.
Listen, we got a lot of stuff to talk about this week, and this is just a conversation between two Richardsons.
Yes, it
Isn't that
is.
true? Yeah.
It is true. Yes, of course.
There's a lot of stories. There's so many crazy stories going on that it's hard to know where to begin. Everything's gone topsy turvy. But uh, in fact, that's a good name for a podcast, isn't it? Topsy turvy.
Topsy turvy.
I shouldn't have said that. Somebody will steal it now.
They
One
will.
of millions of listeners. Anyway, um, there's this story that I think you will like because it's going to incense you. And
Of
here's the
course.
headline. Uh, we're just doing our review of stories as we usually do lately, because the just the geopolitical stuff is too on its own is too soul destroying. Okay, Shakespeare's birthplace to be decolonized after white supremacy fears. That's a headline in the Telegraph. Trust in Stratford-upon-Avon warned that the bard's genius could be seen as a symbol of British cultural superiority. Now, what do you think about that? You did a viral comment on another podcast on what was it on TikTok? You
Yeah.
had 1 million views or something on TikTok on this very subject. What was it? What do you think about a headline like that?
Well, I think
It is Shakespeare.
it's absolutely
Shakespeare.
it's absolutely
Go
completely
ahead.
rubbish. It's complete rubbish. It's attention grabbing by people who've never achieved anything and never will achieve anything. And all they can do is denigrate people who did achieve something. It's an absolute load of nonsense, of course.
I mean, but ask yourself the question: do we really need Shakespeare? Do we really need writers and culture? I mean,
Yes,
honestly, do we?
we do need writers and we do need culture. Obviously, we're living
Oh,
in an age where people are denigrating culture. And look at it, nobody is happier. Nobody has any better mental ability to face the challenges we face because they haven't trained their brains by studying great writers like Shakespeare and others. It's complete
Shakespeare's
nonsense.
amazing.
This anti-colonialism is complete nonsense.
Yeah,
Absolute rubbish.
yeah.
I mean,
Everything from Europe is
Shakespeare
terrible.
had died before the age of so-called colonialism anyway.
Yeah.
And you only have to go to these African countries, and you see the way that the modern rulers treat their population. They treat, with the exception of the Belgian Congo, they treat their population in a way the colonial authorities would never have dared to treat other human beings. And this is the difference. And this is what people are not allowed to say. these people, they destroy their countries. The politicians and the other elites destroy their countries, taking all the money and the resources, and the people in these countries live in absolute poverty, absolute chaos, struggle to make a living. And yet these same people who are raping their own countries then have the audacity to turn around and blame it all on the white man and blame it all on colonialism. It's complete. You only have to look at Zimbabwe to see how wrong that is. A country
You
which
can
at
look
the
at
time...
Nicaragua.
Yeah.
Nicaragua, a place that I lived for on and off for 2.5 years. You have to, you can see it there with Ortega, who's supposed to be the great Sandinista. He's just been installed himself in power for the last 20 years, and or so. I mean, he was there before too. So he's been in power probably 30 years in Nicaragua, and it's exactly that case. It has not elevated the people as a whole, which is the promise of socialism, isn't it?
Well, of course it is, but as we know, the left have been buggering up the world since the French Revolution. They hate the people below them and they hate the people above them. They hate everybody except themselves, and they want to destroy all systems in the name of some fictitious, better utopia.
Let me read some of this. I mean, that was a good rant, but no, I mean, it's frustrating because it seems so contra-intuitive that you would attack Shakespeare as a supremacist. He had no thought other than to create works in his time. He had no thought of imperialism. It's ridiculous. So you can't blame him, even if that is your interpretation, that Shakespeare is a symbol of white supremacy. But anyway, with Shakespeare's birthplace is being decolonized in quotes, following concerns about playwright being used to promote white supremacy. Shakespeare's birthplace trust owns buildings linked to the bard in his hometown of Stratford-upon-Avon. Trust also owns archival material, including parish records of the playwright's birth and baptism. It is now decolonizing its vast collection to create a more inclusive museum experience. I love it when they call it a museum experience, don't you?
Well, I know. I'd rather go to
experience.
I don't want a museum experience. I want to go to a museum and see things and learn things. I don't want a fucking experience. Pardon my French.
You don't want to sit in a
No, I don't.
vibrating chair that sends transmits Shakespeare directly to your innards.
No.
Anyway, look, this process includes exploring the continued impact of empire, which is what you're talking about, on the collection, the impact of colonialism on world history, and how Shakespeare's work has played a part in this.
Unbelievable.
I never thought I'd hear anything so stupid.
Well, unfortunately, and this sort of stupidity is captured increasingly in the major universities.
Of course. Shakespeare, can you believe?
Even I was reading not so long, even at Oxford, they wanted to decolonize the music curriculum. Decolonize the music curriculum because allegedly Beethoven wrote some of his music at a time when other people, nothing to do with Beethoven, were doing things in the colonies. I mean, unbelievably stupid. This is Oxford University. What is wrong with these people? What is wrong with them, of course, is they live at public expense. And they don't have to justify their existence other than to their peers who are equally cuckoo.
Well,
it's just this word decolonize. It's one of these. It's just become one of these trendy things that people say. They have no idea what they're talking about. Most of the British Empire was not actually colonial in that sense. Very few of the territories that were ruled by the United Kingdom at that time were actually technically colonies. But I mean, this is a subtlety lost on these stupid people because they don't want to hear anything other than the echoes in their own empty brains.
You sound like a Democrat friend of mine who was vituperative in the same way. Not this subject, he'd probably agree with you, but about the visa stuff going on, and this is very confusing. Anyway, we're not going to get through that.
Shakespeare
requires the idea of Shakespeare's universal genius, quoting from the Telegraph article, benefits the ideology of white European supremacy, it is claimed. Okay. that just really caps it, doesn't it? And British cultural superiority, etc., etc., etc. I believe your viral comment was exactly that Western Europe culture is superior.
Well, essentially it was.
To many, not to all, but to many of the more undeveloped cultures. I mean, it's not to say that if you're Margaret Mead studying anthropology of people in Papua New Guinea or the Amazon rainforest isn't fascinating. It's fascinating to me, but that doesn't mean that their culture is higher or that it's mutually exclusive, that headhunters live or head shrinkers live in the Amazon or in Papua New Guinea. You can still have Shakespeare, and that and Shakespeare can be relevant, and certainly it's more intellectually challenging to get inside your head rather than to just chop it off. I think that kind of caps it, doesn't it?
That's a very good comment. Yes.
All right. Well, maybe.
Good. Have you got anything less depressing for us?
Yes, sir. I'm trying. I'm trying. No, let me see what I've got here. Well, there's corporate branding for the White House. Now, I don't know how you feel about corporate branding. I mean, it seems that everybody and his brother and mother and sister and father and dead relatives is branding themselves now. How about this? The White House has a company called Harbinger. Harbinger, great name for a company doing corporate branding. I thought it was a great name for a company doing that anyway. I mean that seriously. They are looking for a corporate sponsor for the Easter egg hunt.
What is the point of this?
I mean, eventually you're just going to have Adidas, well, it won't be them, but some Under Armour made in China by slave labor sponsors the White House, East Wing. There'll be a big neon sign. I mean, that's next, isn't it?
It is. It's
White
just
House sponsored by McDonald's.
It's ridiculous. It really is. It is demeaning of the office of the president, I think.
I think as long as it makes money, there is no more such a thing as demeaning, considering some of the biggest heroes now are people on OnlyFans who strip off and perform all kinds of things for their fans and become millionaires.
I know we live in a very strange time.
Boredom, individually and in the corporate sphere, seems to be the way. There is no shame anymore.
No.
And that's not as long as it's paying.
And that's a pity.
Yeah, well, I don't know. Should there be shame? That's a whole nother subject, isn't
it? I think people should exercise personal restraint and control.
And why?
And why?
Yeah, why? Why?
Because we have to live together in a society, and if people are engaging in complete self-indulgence, society falls apart. And the same people who want to behave with complete indulgence get very upset when Mr. Putin decides he'd like a chunk of a neighboring country, because it's all part of the same continuum. He thinks we are stupid, self-indulgent, decadent, and don't have the will to defend what the values we claim we have. And on the present evidence, he's absolutely correct. So with his much reduced GDP and his much reduced population and everything else, he's still able to run rings around everybody else on the planet, with the exception of the Chinese, who are even cleverer and more dangerous than he is. But where nobody's interested in this, because they're all worried about whether there are enough transgender lavatories and whether they're able to get access to OnlyFans and all this nonsense. And these people who complained about somebody switching off or threatening to switch off TikTok in North America support the sort of regimes everywhere else, America, the great Satan. But they support the sort of regimes where they do turn off TikTok and they do turn off the internet. And even in the Gulf states, for example, in Dubai, you cannot access WhatsApp, for example. It just doesn't work there. It's switched off. There is a local equivalent which you can access, and I wonder why that should be. But these people, unfortunately, are too limited, too willfully ill-educated to be able to put two and two together. I'm afraid it's very much the Roman bread and circuses era in which we now live. which came shortly before the fall of that particular empire.
Yeah, I mean, nothing signals an imminent decline, or that you're in a decline and an imminent collapse, more than pornography being the greatest value in society.
Well, this is, of course, this is what the left want. They want to dissolve any values, any connection which an individual has with another individual, because thereby they make society weaker. Thereby, the individual members of society are more easily manipulated and oppressed, ultimately. You know, if you are you, if I am me, we have no strength. But if we're a member of a family, we have more strength. If we are a member of a church and a family, we have even more strength. If we're a member of a church, a family, and a trade union, we have a lot more strength.
Or a club.
Or a club, but it doesn't matter. But the point is, we are a collection of beings who have an ability to act together, which makes us less easily manipulated.
We need each other. I mean, I remember Margaret Thatcher when she said there is no such thing as society, that this was really signaling her eventual downfall to me.
Yeah, but the point was
cannot be at the heart of your policy.
Yeah, but the point was the point she was making was rather different. And most people don't finish the whole quotation. What she was saying is, everybody walked by and left this poor chap by the side of the road. But the Good Samaritan came along. He didn't say, this is society's problem. He dealt with it himself. So she's saying, you can't put all the problems of the world on this amorphous thing called society and leave it to everybody else to sort out the problems. As individuals,
if you want to privatize the coal mines and privatize the trains and all the rest of it, then that's the first thing you're going to do. Which leads me to this question. I mean, no, your comment, of course, is a good comment.
Thank you.
And
all my comments are good comments.
I know your comments are fabulous. I didn't want to step on your beautiful comment because it was very good, but I just wanted to keep things moving. I don't mean to interrupt you.
Well, you keep them moving. It's your show.
Well, I mean, it's your show too. I mean, you're on regularly, and we're pals. So.
Okay, fire away.
And I esteem your opinions and your experience. So it's important that you know and people know that I'm listening to you carefully. But I think most of what you say is a load of balls. But no, I'm kidding. That's not true. What the first thing is true. You're a good man. You're a lovely fellow. Okay, let's move on to the SpaceX, because, okay, on the one hand, Elon Musk represents Lucifer himself incarnate in many people's eyes. Hence the destruction of Tesla automobiles we talked about last time.
Yeah.
And just the vituperation from his detractors. I don't know what vituperation means, but I heard it used in a context like that. Anyway, so I think it means being angry and saying angry things. But then you have this fellow who's developed SpaceX. First of all, he's developed the most popular green automobile, fully green electric automobile, so-called green. Okay, we use electricity to charge these, which comes from mainly coal-fired, or it's not coming from nuclear power. So any other power is not clean, right? Even if you have filters on it. Generally, it's still a problem with pollution and expense using the grid to charge cars. But he was once a hero. Now he's not a hero, and people can't seem to make their mind up. Is he the Antichrist, or is he our savior? And I think he's neither. He's just a human being who's very intelligent and has a lot of great ideas, including SpaceX, which is amazing. It's revivified the space program in America, which had been pretty much deserted except for satellites and space probes since they stopped the space shuttle. I never really understood the purpose of the space shuttle. I always thought it was more interesting to use rockets. because we have satellites that can show you everything the space shuttle can. And it seems incredibly dangerous to use the same thing over and over going through the atmosphere. And that was proved with 2 horrific crashes, right?
Yeah. Well, indeed.
What do you think about the SpaceX rescuing the people in the space station?
Well, yeah, I mean, to be fair, they weren't exactly rescued because it was a scheduled return. The craft they were due to come back when after 8 days, there was a concern it wasn't functioning properly. So there was, it was sent back empty just in case. The next scheduled flight was the one they came back on. So I think, you know, the idea they were stranded and they'd been forgotten about is a bit overdone by the press. You know, the next bus was 9 months later than they were hoping. It's as simple as that, I think. But no, I mean, in terms of SpaceX, in terms of technical,
That's a long time up in the air. We're still not really sure about the effects of being, on skeletal structure and things, muscles, from being in space on
no.
over these long periods of time. But that's I guess one of the great things about the space station. You can test those effects, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But no, again, a very good point. There's just hysteria in the media. I mean, it's a cliche to even talk about it, and this having a ridiculous headline just to get people to hit, and then you don't get the answer to what the story's about to the last paragraph or
If
last but one. What?
If you're lucky, you get it then. Half the time, you don't actually get it at all.
It's so weird. It's the opposite way to write a news story or a feature,
Yeah, these are not written by people who know what they're doing, are they? They're not written by trained journalists. They're not written by people who are seeking to share information. They're written by people who are seeking to generate clicks on their site.
Exactly, and a lot of times it's all confused, and there's no sort of structure to these articles. It's so weird.
Exactly.
Anyway, but in the old, in the 90s, 2000s, early 2000s, you wouldn't have got published if you were writing this way. It's incoherent.
Well, now everybody can publish themselves, so that's why the quality has gone down, and there's no quality control on most of this stuff.
Yeah, writing is hard, I find. It takes a lot of concentration to produce something really good. Okay, really, certainly lasting. What do you think about Greenland come back in the news? The Danes are trying to figure out how to defend Greenland or Greenland. How do you say it? How do you say it?
Well, I say Greenland, but
Greenland. Yeah, it's hard to defend, and the Danes are working on defending it. What do you think about? We talked a little bit about this last time, but what do you think about the Danes being under the gun here?
Well, it seems very strange because Denmark is, like the United States, a NATO member country. Greenland has a certain amount of autonomy within the wider Danish political system. And some people in Greenland had sort of suggested they might like to become independent. But I gather since the recent election, everybody decided, well, actually, if independence means we're going to be in danger of Donald Trump, we'd rather stay as we are, which seems very logical. There are American
people
bases.
Don't like being pushed around. He hasn't made
exactly.
a deal with them.
There are already United States military bases in Greenland, so it's not as if the country was in any danger, or that America was in any danger of not having access to whatever it has access to on Greenland already.
Okay, let me read this paragraph to you and then get a comment from you. This is from the Washington Post. I guess they've still got a few journalists left over there, although I don't see what the problem is, because Bezos certainly has enough money to pay them and keep the paper going.
Sorry, just to interject, isn't the problem?
Go ahead. No, please do.
With the Washington Post, the problem is that Bezos was not about whether he paid them. He was beginning to tell them what they could and couldn't say. And that certain articles which criticise certain things would no longer be tolerated. That's, I think, what drove the journalists with integrity, or particularly the editor, away.
So, okay, I accept I remember that's the case. That's a good. Again, you're making nothing but good comments. I should talk to you even more often. Listen to this. This is a Wall Street Journal from the byline is Copenhagen. One way or another, President Trump has said the United States needs to get, in quotations, Greenland, not only to defend the homeland, but the freedom of the world, in quotes, freedom of the world. Denmark, he says, isn't doing enough. Trump says isn't doing nearly enough to protect it. He's named two potential adversaries. Guess who they are?
Russia and China.
Correct. Its location way out there in a hostile ocean between Western Europe and Russia made Greenland, because they all meet at the top, of course, made Greenland strategically vital during the Cold War. After the Soviet Union collapsed, not so much. As tensions rise across a melting, militarizing Arctic, a melting Arctic, the world's largest island is back on the map. But certainly, Denmark is in NATO. So, as a member of NATO, the United States has an obligation, if Denmark is attacked, along with other NATO countries, to defend it, including Canada.
Correct. So I don't see what the danger is.
It doesn't make sense. I mean, are these adults writing these things and saying I don't understand what's going on. Can nobody think?
Well, it seems that in the White House, thinking is at a discount at the moment. Yeah, that's part of the problem. If he was worried about defending the free world, Donald Trump certainly wouldn't be causing allies within NATO to be worried now that if they buy F-35 jets, the Americans will not update the software or something like that. Or he's giving the intimation that if they don't spend enough on defense, America will abandon them anyway. That just encourages China, it encourages Russia, and it really is not really compatible with saying you want to defend the free world. And indeed, by saying you're going to take Greenland because you think you need it to defend yourself, or you're going to take the Panama Canal back because you think you need it to defend yourself, the Chinese are going to say, we absolutely agree with you. That's why we're taking Taiwan to defend ourselves. That's why we are fortifying all those contested islands in the South China Sea, which is why we want to try and turn the South China Sea into a Chinese-controlled lake, in complete contravention of a number of international court rulings. The same international court rulings which the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer uses as justification for surrendering the Chagos Islands to Mauritius, which is further away from the Chagos Islands than India is, which islands were never part of Mauritius anyway, and which country, Mauritius, the Chinese are desperately keen to influence. The Chinese are the big enemy.
How does this
unfortunately, Trump's
How does this
behavior
relate to Greenland? Please tie it together.
Well, because it relates to Greenland, because essentially if he's saying, if the president is saying, look, we've got to have Greenland because there's a threat from Russia and China. Well, yes, there may be, but please don't therefore undermine or encourage Russia and China in other parts of the world by behaving. There is no difference between him saying, I need Greenland for security, to President Putin saying, I need Ukraine for security because I've got all these NATO countries on my border and I need to control this because I can't have Ukraine so close as a member of a NATO and or Western alliance. So it's exactly the same argument. He's encouraging his enemies to advance the arguments which in a different context he finds unacceptable.
Listen, let's move on to another subject. I think we covered that, and thanks for the nice linking. That was really good and clear. I just wanted to link that for people because I knew it was a good thought. I believed it was myself. But sometimes we need to make it not skip the references, connecting the references, right? So well done on that. Let's move on to what is the, here's the thing, a question that I mean, the answer to this question is something that I think people forget very often in the heat of the moment. And that is, unless they're doing it on purpose, which is also true, and that is, what is the only democracy in the Middle East? And maybe democracy is not a good thing, but what's the only democracy?
Israel.
Correct. Doesn't that give Israel a sort of moral authority from the get-go, from the beginning?
Well, of course it does. But the left wing and allied trades don't like that. They would much rather bleat on about Hamas supporting Palestinians. And let's if we're Hamas is supported by certainly in the Gaza Strip, not in the West Bank, because that's the other Palestinian grouping. But yes, exactly, it is the only democracy. We know so much.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
So we know so much about Israel because journalists can operate in Israel.
Yeah, there you go.
And they're free to say these things.
And what about women's rights, etc.? I mean, just human rights generally.
Yeah, well, Israel women do have, and others do have rights, which they do not enjoy anywhere else in the Middle East.
Also, Arabs freely work, or Muslims freely work in Israel. That is not the same for Jewish people throughout the Middle East. It is not
exactly.
the same. Where if you have a stamp in your passport, from Israel and you try to go to some of the Middle Eastern countries, can be a problem for you.
It can be a problem for you, yeah. And there are many.
Maybe not the Emirates, but all the other countries.
There are many Israeli citizens who are in fact Arabs, and they have the same rights as any other Israeli citizen.
Yeah. So here's the thing. Israel is a democracy. The the other countries in the Middle East are not democracies. They're kingdoms or some sort of dictatorship. So therefore, Hamas is supported by dictatorships, both theocracies and, in the past, secular dictatorships. So therefore, if you are for Hamas, for dictatorships, and a lot of the people who are for Hamas are anti-religion, so they're also for theocracy, which is a complete contradiction, then doesn't that also mean that you should be happy with any dictatorial moves, so-called dictatorial moves by Donald Trump or any other?
Well, exactly. This of course is just typical of the left, and it generally is the left who think in this way of sort of inconsistency. So if I said, look, I think women shouldn't have any rights, blah 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 blah, I think they should be subjected to their husband's will in every way, people would say, oh, in fact there's a cartoon to this effect on one of the social media, oh, you're a terrible bigot. But if I say, I'm sorry, I'm a Muslim, they say, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't want to offend you because you're a Muslim. This is the complete nonsense.
Yeah, why do Muslims get a break? I mean, I've been all over the Middle East, really. I have, in many countries, in very different situations. And I can tell you, Israel is by far and away the most comfortable, civilized, normal country. It's like a European or country, the United States, compared to all the others, which are very, very restrictive and strange and even dangerous.
Well, they are.
Except the Emirates.
But even the Emirates, at the end of the day, these are absolute monarchies, and they appear to have a certain amount of freedom in places like Dubai and Abu Dhabi, maybe. But if push comes to shove, I think you'll find, I mean, there have been famous cases of people who, even in those countries, have done something which offended somebody, and they got into a pickle over it.
Nicholas, exactly. But what's the reason? I guess it's a lack of reason that creates this kind of obvious hypocrisy, obvious contradictions. I mean, what is causing this, particularly in universities, students to be so emotional rather than using their brains and looking for addressing these different situations with an empirical point of view, which is exactly what you're supposed to do in college, particularly if you're a scientist. Or a historian.
I've really no idea. I'm as mystified by this as you are.
Yeah,
all we can do is fight against the nonsense.
Yeah, I think it's just
there was a case of a scientist at Porton Down in the UK. Porton Down is the government's secret laboratory for developing things, and chemical warfare and other scientific stuff. He won an employment tribunal case. He'd been a scientist there. He's a scientist. They're all scientists at Portendown. He'd been there for 14 years. And he had happened to, in his private capacity, he'd happened to point out that there are men and there are women. And people on the internal WhatsApp groups were saying this was terribly bigoted. He was oppressing trans people. So he lost his job. And he said, hang on, how could I lose my job? This is a scientific establishment. I'm merely repeating a scientific fact. Anyway, he went to an employment tribunal and was awarded compensation of £30,000. Because we're seeing this all over in the universities. You know, this whole trans and nonsense, and it is nonsense.
If America is so horrible and the West is so horrible, why is everybody trying to get in?
Because it's not so horrible. That's the whole point. They're lying.
Yeah. So why do people hate culture and
because they're indulging themselves?
But they don't want to live in any of these other places.
It goes back to their self-indulgence. They can get away with saying it in America. They wouldn't get away with saying it in China or Saudi Arabia. Or that's it. They think it's very funny to behave in this way because we can get away with it. If they were brave people, if they thought black lives really mattered, they would be actually now getting on an airplane, going to Benghazi in Libya, and trying to liberate people from the slave markets if they were really worried about it. But they won't do that because they wouldn't get very far once they got off the plane. And the sort of thing they would say, they're just being self-indulgent because we live in many ways, fortunately, but the first generation or couple of generations in Western history who've not actually had to fight for anything. They've not had to defend their values, and they've forgotten. They've forgotten at the great price at which this liberty was won. In last week, the final pilot who'd taken part in the Battle of Britain, an Irish pilot, died at the age of 105. The last of the few finally left us. And those young men, as they were at the time, they went up in these little planes. In a Spitfire, I think they had only 12 seconds of ammunition. Very brave people with 12 hours flying experience.
This is a great point.
That's to defend democracy. And these people they must be overwhelmingly amazed and in many ways discouraged that what they fought for, they all lost many friends, many comrades in battle, to think this, something they had given the supreme sacrifice for, should be trashed by a generation who takes it all for granted. It's frightening.
Let's move on. You mentioned the war. That's a very good example, too, about a lot of people don't realize that it's not like it is in the movies. They had very little ammunition compared to the amount of flying time they had to put in patrolling the skies and then returning home. These people were incredibly brave. They weren't just putting up tents and they were young and at the same age as these people are putting up tents on college campuses and calling themselves cultural warriors, with a trust.
They're not
fund.
Warriors at all. They're self-indulgent.
These were real
pathetic people who couldn't fight their way out of a paper bag, most of them.
Of course.
I suspect.
Oh, they're very good at ganging up on one person.
Oh yeah, they're big, but diversity. Unless you disagree with me, in which case there's no diversity of thought there.
No, diversity means that you can get a group of different ethnic people to gang up on one person.
Yeah, exactly.
Diversity in their method of attack, jackasses.
Exactly.
Okay. But I have to say, all of this political stuff goes on. When you go to a shop, a store, a restaurant, anywhere in the West, people are generally helpful and very cool, and so we have to keep in mind. This is what I like. I'm thinking about doing a series of interviews and maybe put it into a book form or something, even if it's just internet book, with regular people about regular lives, because these are the people who make things work. The people getting all the headlines or getting the cream, But, you know, and that rises atop. But the substance of culture and business and everything else, government, is from ordinary people just getting up and doing a job. And
Yeah, of
I think
course.
everybody's kind of interesting in their own way. I really do. I find I meet some really interesting people, even if they're eccentric or whatever. They know things that I don't know about their own about the kind of work they do. Right?
Yeah,
You, do,
exactly.
do you agree with that, or?
I do agree. Yes, that most of the vast majority of people the world over have exactly the same concerns,
Yeah.
which is they want to, get up in the morning, do meaningful work, get paid for it, provide for their families, hope that their children in life achieve more than they achieved in their life. And they don't have time for this self-indulgent nonsense. And before they could trust the politicians to be equally decent people, so although they didn't have time, they didn't have to worry too much because the politicians were sensible. What's happened now, more latterly, is that the politicians themselves have lacked the caliber and the integrity of before, so they need watching even more closely.
Yes.
And they, many cases, are otherwise unemployable, so they have to make sure they stay in their jobs. And therefore, they're not interested in running the country in an efficient manner. They're only interested in their own survival, because they couldn't hack it in the outside world, because most of them have never had to get up in the morning and think to themselves, where is the next dollar coming from? If I don't do X, Y, Z today, my children will not eat. They've not had to do it. They've lived largely at the expense of the public purse, which they have then completely mismanaged. So the public purse is getting ever more empty, and the debt is increasing, and the whole thing is beginning to head towards a pretty frightening conclusion if we're not careful.
Well, I can tell you this, that prices of things are really hugely increased
They
across
are.
the board over what they were pre-COVID. And
I
we
know.
said when COVID happened, we in the March, just after when the first thing was, the first shutdown was called, um, we did a couple of shows and we talked about how this was going to kill the economy, create huge inflation. It was going to kill businesses. It was going to kill people psychologically. It was going to make sick people sicker because they wouldn't be able to get the attention they needed. And it was going to be worse to shut down than just to face the scourge
Exactly.
and take precautions for the weak, the weakest, most affected, and to take ordinary precautions uh, for healthy people.
I agree.
And
And we said that.
this was ignored in favor of a sort of witch hunt. It's the goddamnedest thing I've seen in my lifetime, actually.
I know.
Worse than any of the assassinations and whatever attempts at
Yes.
assassination. A much bigger nightmare.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Facebook refusing, removing stories by people who had a different point of view.
Not just Facebook, but Twitter and other places.
All of them.
You
All of
know,
them.
we forget. We have no wonder people are in trouble. We have been, as society in the West, we have been put through the ringer since 2000. Since 2000, with the crazy election in the United States, where the Supreme Court had to pick a winner between Bush and Gore. Then 9/11 immediately after that, then invasions of Iran and Afghanistan, and then Iraq after that, and the wars that took place there for so long. Then 2008, when the banking system came after the whole west of Western society, and no one got punished for the derivative trading that went on and the the obvious corruption and evil of that way of looking at
Well, exactly. That was essentially corruption.
yeah, and then we've been looking at this Ukraine war for since 2014, 2013 in November with the protests in Kiev, I think, or Kiev, as people who don't know anything about Ukraine like to say.
Oh,
Um,
dreadful.
Kiev is the way Ukrainians always said it until this weird things started happening. Um, then then the pandemic, well, the election of the crazy election between Trump and Hillary and all that nonsense on both sides. Uh, up to the pandemic. And it's just been one crazy event after another, and really awful responses from government
Terrible responses from government.
to each event, and then obfuscating everything.
Lying about stuff.
Yeah, and covering up. This has just been the craziest 25 years. No wonder kids are confused
Well, exactly.
if they've grown up during this time.
Closing
The
schools was the worst thing.
psychological and financial toll is immense.
Closing schools was the worst thing that could have been done.
Terrible.
Absolutely the worst thing.
Terrible. If you had a kid, you had, we had kids at home during this time. They couldn't go to school, and if they weren't applying themselves, they didn't get anything.
Yeah, I know. And not every parent or every family could provide their school-aged children with a computer and a room in which they could work peacefully and get the job done. That's the other thing which people forget. All these people say, "Oh, I think lockdown was fantastic." Blah 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 blah. What about the people?
If you're lazy, but if you like freedom and getting about your business, then lockdown was terrible.
Yeah, but if you were a young couple, for example, with two young school-aged children living in a small flat in a city centre, lockdown was a disaster for you.
Total nightmare.
You couldn't necessarily, even if the schools were providing online lessons, it wasn't a foregone conclusion that you would be able to provide the conditions for your children to actually benefit from them. And this is the big, the nonsense of it all. And the children were not an at-risk group. Really,
that's right. That's true. It wasn't like the 1918 1919 flu, which killed indiscriminately.
Well, exactly. So again, governments would not use common sense. I accept in the very early days, people didn't know, there was a bit of panic, but it soon became apparent what was happening. But the governments would not retreat from it. They doubled down each time. They just doubled down on the stupidity.
Absolutely. I've got, we're going to end up pretty soon, Nicholas. I thought I've enjoyed the conversation, as I always do with you. I think we're getting more and more interesting because there's so much material around us, both within the last quarter century and as we just were talking about, and just every week now. I
mean, I think this is probably
you can't depend on anything.
Yeah, but I think
except death and taxes.
Yeah, in the old days, I'm going back a long way, maybe into the beginning of the last century. Governments were made up of educated people who might have thought into their own education and their history and thought, okay, yes, well, here's a problem. What would the Greeks have done, or what would the Romans have done from a philosophical point of view? And now we have stupid people who sit there thinking, how can I make this look good on TikTok? I mean,
how can I make money by sponsoring the White House? How about this? Russian, pick your own favorite. I think there's a Russian vodka called Parliamentary or Parliament, which is huge. For example, Parliament vodka sponsors the cathedral in Kiev. Is that next? Is that how we're going to make deals? Everything's just going to come down to we're all going to be wearing sponsorship all the time. It's not a new idea. It's been around for a while. So let's move on to this one. This is not a new idea either, this last one. We're going to end on this one. Bless you. You got a cold, right?
Yeah, a bit of a cold. Sorry about that, folks.
Yeah, that's okay. Hope you feel better soon, Nick. Now, the last thing I want to talk about, and then we're going to finish on this one. I know you're a lawyer and you're a newsman, but you're also a fellow who is as widely read as anyone I know, and that I know quite a lot of people. and also a historian in your own right. Not to mention a great conversationalist, but
Thank you.
what do you know, it seems to me Norm Macdonald did a great joke about this, that the country he fears most in the world is not North Korea. He doesn't wake up in the middle of the night. I'm paraphrasing. I'm not going to do my Norm Macdonald imitation here, but he is the great genius. Was, but we still have him on YouTube. Norm Macdonald, look him up, folks. You can't do better. You can do a lot worse than listening to this man. But he said the country he really fears is a country called Germany, which is a bit like impression of him. So because they fought a war against the world, and then when it's a close thing, and then they fought the world again, right? So they fought the world twice. What do you think about German rearmaments now? Because Peter Zion, whose podcast I really enjoy, or his posts I really enjoy, along with George Friedman, these are really interesting geopolitical thinkers, amongst others, but they're really good. Particularly about Central Europe. They've been really on point about Central Europe for a long time. And Zion learned from Friedman, went out on his own now. He was saying that German rearmament really worries him. Peter Zion was. What do you think about it?
Well, I think to the extent that Germany is on our side, it's less worrying than it was historically. The generation of modern Germans, Germany has been particularly demilitarized since the Second World War, and I think German rearmament compared to Russian aggression is probably the lesser of two evils. I think the modern Germany is very different from the Germany people feared in the First World War and the Second World War.
So it's flipped around, because it used to be the Russians we were afraid of. Sorry, the Germans we were afraid of, and the Russians were our ally.
Well, yes. I mean, this is how things change dramatically. Yes, I'm not as concerned as I might have been before, because it's quite clear we need Europe to react. Here's something very funny on rearmament. There's a new European, irrespective of what the Germans do, there's going to be a new European Union fund of 150 billion euros to invest in defence, but not in the defence industries of the United States, United Kingdom, or Turkey, because this money has to be spent in the European Union. However, Germany is quite keen that the United Kingdom makes some contribution to this arrangement, so that because we do have a good defence industry, if only our government would actually buy more from it, so that they can buy UK military kit. However, the French have said no, because this has to be part of a wider renegotiation, including the access of French fishermen to British fishing waters. So you heard it here first. The future defence of Europe does depend on French fishermen getting a bigger share of fish from British fishing waters, because to the French, fish are more important than the defence of Europe. I think the French are probably getting very excited about this. They just want to know. It's a long time since they found a war they could surrender in, and I think they're very excited that they could be. They're getting itchy feet now. They haven't surrendered for a long time, so they're looking forward to a conflict with Russia, so they can give up pretty quickly. I think. Slightly.
Listen to this. Germany has just, this is from an article from CNN. Germany has just passed a major reform to its constitutional debt break, unlocking billions of euros in funding. So this sort of follows on to what you're talking about. One model shared with CNN suggested over a 10-year period, with Germany's spending, 3.5% of GDP could be spent. That's about 600 billion euros, which is well above the 2% that is supposed to be put in by each NATO country, right?
Yeah, well, but I think the percentage of GDP is useful, but the way to look at it is to actually think, well, what do we actually need and how much is it going to cost? Because 2.5% of GDP may or may not be appropriate. Poland is spending 4%. I mean, Poland is spending a bigger percentage of GDP than the United States, for example.
I don't
Then
know.
you have,
This looks a lot like pre-World War. It's been looking a lot like pre-World War One to me for a long time, although it's just stretched out more because it's everything's much more under a microscope, so that slows things down. But Germany rearming is a strange moment, my friend. Germany, we were we remember when Germany reunited. That was a very strange moment. I mean, I
it
was
was,
for it. I guess, were you for it? I was for it.
of course, yeah.
Yeah. And I remember that as being a very strange moment in light of, the two wars that Norm Macdonald so succinctly drew attention to, and Germany's part in them. I wonder, once they start rearming because of their geopolitical position in Europe, what it will mean. Any uh, any thoughts on that?
Well, I think
Beyond just that,
but the modern Germans are very keen on this sort of community spirit within the European Union.
yeah.
So I
I
don't
think as
see,
long as they're in control,
yeah.
they're in
I don't
control.
really. I'm not sure that there is a body of a population in Germany sufficiently numerous to sort of try and resurrect the Fourth Reich or something. I just
It
don't
doesn't
think the
have to be
German
that. I mean,
population.
Kaiser Wilhelm was not in any way a fascist.
Yeah, but he did
Prussians
have.
were not fascists over the years. Bismarck was not a fascist.
Yes, but
That
Kaiser Wilhelm did
I
have
think
a
it's more
few.
about their position
Yeah,
in
did
Europe.
have a few complexes, of course. So
Well, that's true.
that's he if you depend whether you subscribe to the A.J.P. Taylor theory that the Second World War, sorry, First World War broke out because of railway timetables. And once they given the decision to mobilize, they couldn't stop the trains in all these various countries.
In the First World War,
Yeah,
yeah,
is
and
it
the
more?
biggest battle took place just north of where you're sitting, in the Battle of Tannenberg, which was
Yeah,
uh, the first great battle between the Russians and Germans, involving nearly 1 million men and trains, moving people by trains and the different gauges. It was a nightmare of logistics. It's an absolutely fascinating uh, battle. I've been over the battlefields
no,
myself.
so just to
Uh,
answer your question, fine. I don't fear German rearmament. What I do fear, it's the poor quality of thinking now among politicians generally, because
yeah,
they're more likely to make mistakes because of their willful ignorance of history, their inability to defend European values. Because at the same time as they're worrying about the borders of Ukraine, they seem to be singularly unworried about the borders of the European Union,
it's
or indeed
funny
the
to me.
United Kingdom.
It's a good
Un-
point, and
Uncontrolled
uh,
immigration will
it's
destroy
funny to me
Europe.
that people so readily think that other people's values are better than their own,
But they're demonstrably not better.
while they're enjoying their own prosperity. Um, they're critical of their
I
own.
mean,
I understand it's a kind of guilt complex. I get that, but you can, you're allowed to have that when you're pampered and very young. But as you get older, reality, and you travel and have experience of life, uh, your opinion should change. It
of
should
course it should.
evolve
As the
to
great John
understanding and
Maynard,
appreciation
yeah,
of your
as
own.
John Maynard Keynes said, I find that if the facts change, my opinion changes. And he implied that anybody who didn't think the same way was not very intelligent.
Yeah,
Because if you're making decisions as you should on an empirical basis, then as the facts change, by definition, you will apply analysis, and you might end up with a new conclusion. Um,
UFOs, UFOs, real or unreal?
I suspect unreal.
Unreal, you suspect. JFK, we're going to learn Oswald did it alone, or it's a conspiracy?
I don't know. It has seemed for a long time. It depends. Whether I mean, the Russians always said that that when Oswald had been in Russia and been doing target practice, he couldn't hit anything. Um, and he was just a useless shot. Now, whether that's just a bit of Russian disinformation, I know not.
Really? Well, it depends on how far away it is, but with a scope, it's really hard to miss, actually.
Yeah. It's where I think this is one of the things we'll probably never really know finally.
We'll probably never know, but I don't know. Anyway, I'm going to leave it open, and I'll let everybody make their own conclusions.
I mean, a lot of material has been released last week. Excuse me, but it doesn't seem that it's desperately
80,000 pages or something.
Yeah, it doesn't seem, but there's a lot of that's been redacted, and of course the cynics would say, but the real stuff won't be released anyway because the CIA wouldn't have put it in the National Archives or the FBI or whoever it was. So, who knows?
If they're involved, yeah, I don't know. As we talked about before, I tend to think in assassinations that if there is a plot, you learn about it. We always have throughout history, and if it's a lone nut, of which there are plenty, especially in the age of mass communication, then because they do it because they want attention. This is very often the case. We see the case of the guy who wanted to get the attention of Jodie Foster, so he takes a shot at the president, right?
Yeah.
So
exactly.
the guy who got the autograph from John Lennon then hung around and shot him later, just to be because he
the
was
same
obsessed
with
with him.
the same with the nutcase who killed Gianni Versace
Exactly.
In Miami.
Yes, exactly. It's
He
another
hung
very
around,
good.
he met him, and etc. 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 And then thought it would be a good idea to shoot him.
Yeah. It's so conspiracies, we generally know there are a lot of misfits who want fame by attaching himself to a famous name through an incident like an attack or an assassination. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
That's it for today. Thank you,
Very
sir.
good. Thank
Do you have
you.
any big plans for the week?
No, not there's been another week as normal. Nothing major planned.
Nothing major, just waiting for spring over there, yeah?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Well, hope to see you soon.
Look forward to
In
that.
fact, next week for sure.
Good.
Next time you're in the having a glass of wine, have one for me, will you?
Yeah. Well, I gave up alcohol for Lent, so with the exception.
I gave it up for Lent a long time ago. Okay, cheers.
Ciao.
Thanks.
Bye.
Be
Thanks.
good. Be good. Ciao. Ciao
Yeah.
for now.
Ciao for now.
Yeah.